Hello, very good morning to everyone. I hope you people are doing great. And today, my this lecture is on the one of the editorial analysis of today's news. And here is one article: the need for gender equity in urban bureaucracy. So what we are going to do is, I'll read this passage for your better understanding. Just be with me with the patience because I know many of you are hesitant of watching like reading and all those things on YouTube. But I'll say if you keep some kind of patience, it will be fruitful for your people in the future. So here I read that India is in midst of a profound urban transformation. By 2050, over 800 million people and about half of the population will live in cities, making India the largest driver of global urban growth. As cities expand spatially, economically, and demographically, they are rewriting the social contract of a modern India and shaping the future of its democracy and development. Progressive constitutional reforms have advanced gender equity. Okay, what is all about? I'm just going to give you a brief summary out of this editorial. It's basically this editorial is of importance. I'll just mention you over here that it's just for GS2. It's related with the topic GS2. You can use this editorial in the subsection. It's very useful with the GS point of view, governance, constitution, polity, social justice, and as well as IR. How it's interlinked with each other, I'll let you know. So here it's the subtopics. Here in this tutorial, we have some subtopics, that is role of civil services in democracy. Because in the heading itself, you can read it that there is mention of the urban bureaucracy, right? So obviously, it is related with the term of the civil services. So the subtopics can be role of civil services in a democracy, then government policies and interventions, issues related to women and gender equity, then urban development and infrastructure. Okay, so here the theme, I just mentioned you all what is the theme over here, and then I will give you one question to practice. Okay, so without wasting time, let's just start with this session. Here, it's in the article, it's given that India is undergoing a rapid urban transformations, projected to become home to 800 million urban dwellers by 2050. Okay, we have read this information from this article. Okay, from this editorial. What does it mean? That it's making the world's largest urban democracy. While this shift demands a robust, inclusive, and responsive urban governance, bureaucratic institutions remains male-dominated. Means that in the bureaucratic field, we find that the women representation is still in the lower number, leading to a gender-blind urban planning and decision making. Despite constitutional and political reforms that have empowered women politically at the grassroots, gender equity in bureaucratic and technical arms of governance remains a major gap. It means like we as per the data, like 73rd and 74th mandated 33% of reservation, and today what's like 46% of local elected representatives comprises of women in the Panchayati Raj institution. Here, the core issue is bureaucratic gender gap. Like until here, women in the grassroots level is it's 46%, now approx 50% in many states, right? Due to 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. So here, what we can do is we can just jot down the core issues. Here, the core issue is, if you want, you can write with me as well in your note, the bureaucratic gender gap. Okay, here the point will be the women in grassroots level or grassroots politics. Okay, here what happened due to 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment, there is 33% reservation that is mandated as per the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments. There is mandated 33% reservation in the PRIs for women. Okay, here what happens is result is that there is extended to 50% and 46% is the data and is extended to more I think here extended to as per the other data is extended to 50% in many states. Okay, this is the result. Okay, next, what is the author's article is saying that it's not in the case of the bureaucracy, right? Not in the case of the bureaucracy or any technical process, any technical post. Okay, as per the data, is 20% of IS officers are women. And policy making also, in policy making roles, only 11.7% are women. So here we can memorize the data because this is very useful for the in the answer writing when we're going to write this data in our. We can use it as a introduction or in the essay if we find any relevant topic relating to this. The topics which as I have mentioned, if you find any relevant topics, we can mention this data. Okay. Without deviating the topic, I just want to continue over here that bureaucratic gender gap. What it comprises that women in the grassroots level politics is increasing up to 50%. But what happening in the bureaucracy or a technical post, that only 20% of IS officers are women, as per the data quoted by India Spend 2022. In policy making roles, also there is a less representation of women, that is only 11.7%. As per data collected by Bureau of Police Research and Development. Okay, so here women are vastly underrepresented in technical cadres like urban planners, engineers, and transport authorities. So women are underrepresented where in the areas like technical cadres like urban planner, transport authorities, and engineers. What do you think? What are the major causes? Major causes would be the dual burden. If woman is going outside of the house, it's stepping out of the house, she has to bear the dual responsibility. It may be, I think, one of the hindrance. As I think it's is per many editorial, it's reflected that the major hindrance for a woman to continue work outside is the dual burden because many of the women, most of the women, are not capable enough to continue this dual burden on their shoulder. And some of the other reasons is their biological clock. The other factor is this social taboo is associated with them if with the working women are not so called good enough. Anyways, let's move on. The impact. Here we have read about the core issue of the topic. Then we have the impact. What does it impact? Impact over here is masculine infrastructure is created. Cities designed for male mobility and safety patterns, ignoring women's lived experiences. It means like you just can think that there is a toilet made for for the men openly they can pee in the public, right? They have the kind of freedom they've chosen. They made the environment, they made the cities in the structure and designed in such a way that it's only safe for the male mobility. Here, the impact is generally that obviously we have discussed what is the impact. What is impact? Is impact is that it's the infrastructure It's created, or cities are designed, only designed for the male mobility and safety patterns. They ignore the women lived experiences. So here, the key arguments. Okay, we know the impact now. The key arguments. What are the key arguments in this editorial? Here in the editorial, it's given that is tokenism versus transformative inclusion. What does it mean? It means that urban governance appears inclusive due to elected women representatives, but administrative decision making remains patriarchal in nature. It means that all the sector in the most of the sector in the administrative, it remains patriarchal in the sense they have the more number of representation for the women, sorry, for the main section. Then the next is structure constant. Here, after reading the editorial, I found that is written tokenism versus transformative inclusion. Next, we have structural constraint. What are the constraints that are structural in nature? That is, technical careers are largely male officers and infrastructure are not gender sensitive. Okay, here the women face mobility constraints, unsafe public spaces, and poor access to services due to gender blind urban design. Okay, next is gender responsive budgeting. Here we can connect this dot like in first of all, gender responsive budgeting is introduced in 2005 in India, but it is underutilized. Okay, but it is underutilized. Here in the Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Philippines are the cities for better implementation of gender responsive budgeting services like women's safety, maternal health, and public transport. Okay, then case studies is taken from other countries in this art editorial. That is, the countries they here we can wrote down jot down this point that case studies from the countries like Rwanda, Brazil, South Korea, then we have Tunisia, then Philippines. One of the case studies mentioning the Rwanda in the country Rwanda, it's what they did. They did they just boosted the maternal health and education via representation. Okay, in case of Rwanda, how they boosted? What they boosted? They boosted the maternal health infrastructure, their facilities, the better access to the health facilities and education as well. How they did these things? Via representation. Next, in the country Brazil, what has happened over there? What they did extra to make the country more gender responsive budgeting or more gender neutral? They did simply focused on the primary healthcare. What they did? They focused on the healthcare services, facilities, infrastructure. They built such kind of both male and female access or places which are both both safer for women as well as men. Next, South Korea. What they did gender auditing of transport, redesign public spaces. South Korea, what in the South Korea, what they did? They just redesigned the public spaces as I was talking before. Then in Tunisia, the laws brought women into technical roles. They made the rules that favored the women to come and make more representation in the technical roles. In case of Philippines, they made the gender responsive budgeting used to support survivor of gender violence. Okay, so here the implications for the urban governance. What are the implications? So women are often rely on public shared transport, yet city designs favor private vehicles For example, 84% of women in Delhi rely on public or shared transport. Okay, these are the implications for the urban governance. Next, we can say that community spaces, sanitations, public safety, uh, street lighting, and even housing design often exclude women's needs, because many of the places you find that the public safety is not there, a proper street lighting. The woman who works in the night shift, how she will go, how she will scared to step out of her house, right? So that's not properly designed. Failure to recruit and retain women. Next, we can say this, that it's like, it's kind of failure in the part that they didn't. It's kind of failure in the sense that they fail to recruit or retain women, just because the women have kind of biological cycle, biological clock there, because in the certain age they have to be reproductively active, and for that cases they have to drop the job, because in that cases she is no longer able to handle both house and as the work professions. In that case, what the many administrative or other areas, whether male dominated areas or in field, they just not able to retain that woman in the position, whether it's like decision making spaces, like infrastructures is remain biased and unsafe for the women. In many companies or in many institutes, the crèche facilities are not yet fully developed. So it's a kind of showing that it's still the women are not able to productively active because of the failure to make the infrastructure neutral for both the gender. Here we can sorry, here we can take some recommendations. It's mentioned in the paragraph that I found that it's mainstream gender equity in urban equity, urban bureaucracy, like more beyond political quotas to structural transformation. There, you have to improve the recruitment and retention and promotion of women in sales offices and technical domains. The first recommendation. So here we can jot down the point that the recommendations. What are the recommendations? Right here, first, mainstream gender equity in urban bureaucracy. Okay, it means move beyond the political quotas. Okay, to a structural transformation. To structural transformation. How it can can be moved? It can be moved through improving recruitment, retention, and promotion, because in many cases the women had to lose a job not just because she is incapable in maintaining or incapable in decision making, only just because the infrastructures are not women based or not in the favorized form. Next recommendation in this editorial is institutionalize gender responsive budgeting. How we can institutionalize gender responsive budgeting? By how we can institutionalize? By linking it with participatory planning, especially in urban local bodies. Mandatory gender audits for all urban infrastructure projects. Here, how we can link it? We link it with the participatory planning, especially in urban local bodies. Next, adopt global best practices. Here we have read now that these are the case studies. In Rwanda, they improved the health infrastructure, and in the Brazil, they also improved they only focused on the primary health care. And in the South Korea, we read we learned in through this editorial that tender auditing of transport, and they designed their public spaces. They again redesigned. Okay, again design means they redesigned. The previous design was not perfectly fit for the women. So what they did, they redesigned the public spaces. So we can take their examples and we can adopt the global best practices through them. Like Philippines, they styles the budgeting to support women's safety. Okay, they designed the budget. Then South Korea's gender impact assessment and infrastructure, like how they impacted in the assessment and infrastructure, because in South Korea the infrastructure developed so fully that impacted the gender assessment. It integrated citizen centric. Now the next they did is integrated citizen centric urban planning models. Here they integrated what they integrated the citizen centric planning models. So these are the adopted global practices. Here we can do one question is like is relevant for the GS topic. Like one question is, despite rising political participation, India's urban local development continues to suffer from bureaucratic gender gap. What is so? So here, this is one quotation is given, and here the one question is, discuss the implication of this gap, suggest measures to build gender responsive urban governance. So how to approach this question? Okay, you can see there is one quotation is given and you have to answer it in a, you have to touch the keywords. Keywords here is implication. Okay, keyword here is implications. Then suggest measures. Here what you have to do is give one quotation. Okay, give one quote. Then you have to give the urban statistics, like in urban area, in urban, what are the figures, what are the percentage. Then give the contrast between political and bureaucratic critique. Okay, this will be your intro. Next, body. For body, you can give first data based gap. As in question, it's talking about the bureaucratic gender gap. Okay, so you have to give the bureaucratic, like only 20% of IAS officers in the urban areas because of the lack urban policies or technical roles. Then what's impacting? It's impacting the unsafe cities, gender blind infrastructure, then failed services. What the initiatives can be taken? Initiatives are the gender responsive budgeting, Indian as well as we can take examples from the global perspectives. Okay, for instance, in India, Tamil Nadu's gender responsive cells, Philippines improving the health infrastructure. Then we have the challenges. Challenges is the gender responsive budgeting is remains underfunded. Tokenism is there, male dominated institutions is there. Then moving on, we can conclude it by the way forward. Just a sec. Way forward, we can in way forward what we can give. Just brainstorm something. Uh, in way forward, we can give that institutional reform should be there. There should be one institutional reform or the more than one. Then inclusive recruitment should be there. The women should not be excluded. They should not be, fired without any proper reason, without just because of their failure of the infrastructure. They should not be the sole criteria. Then the budgeting should be participatory. And in conclusion, that is the last part in your answer. What you can give? You can give a conclusion like that urban transformation must begin with inclusive decision making, equity in cities isn't just about fairness, it's about effective governance. Okay, so you can give in conclusion that inclusive decision making, then equity in cities. What does it mean? Equity in cities is not just about the fairness, is not just about the fairness, but also about the effective governance. So here you can conclude the answer. Okay, this will be your approach in answer writing. We given the quotation, we given the urban statistics, then we given the political versus bureaucratic. Then we will give in the body. You can give the data gap, database gap, then its impact, how it's impacting, this gap is impacting. Then the initiative, that is gender responsive budgeting in India and in global. That the example we can, for instance, we can take in the example of Tamil Nadu, the Philippines. Then challenges like gender responsive budgeting. What are the challenges we are facing in the case of gender responsive budgeting? It's underfunded, it's tokenism, main dominated institutions are there. Obviously, if it is main dominated, means the women's are representative are relatively less or lesser than it should be required. Then in the way forward, we can give, there should be a reform in the institutional, there should be inclusive recruitment, then participatory budgetary. These all things we can give the way forward, and in the conclusion, simply we can give that inclusive decision making is should be made like with the urban transformation. It should be redesigned. The city should be redesigned because equity in cities isn't just about the fairness, it's about the effective governance. So here I'm concluding this lecture with the one editorial. I hope you people like this video. So like, share, and subscribe the channel. Thank you. Hello everyone, here is one more editorial from the newspaper The Hindu. Here is given a receipt in the West Asia, a declaration for the world. So here it's relevant from the viewpoint of GS paper 2, GS paper 3, GS paper 4, and can be easy, can be useful in the AC. So in GS paper 2, we can cover the topics. It's covering the topics. The editorial, this part of the editorial is covering the section of IR, India, West Asia's relation, global diplomacy, Middle East politics. Okay, and for the GS paper 3, it's we can use in the internal security, used for the internal security, that is terrorism and proxy wars and strategic threat. Strategic threats. So GS paper 4, we can use it in like, obviously it's ethics. We can use in international diplomacy, real politics versus idealism, these are the these are the three papers, like just 2, 3, and 4. We can use this article relevant to it. What is the context of this editorial? Okay, here we will read and we will proceed. Like, West Asia has been reset with the bombing of Iran by Israel and the United States. Okay, it has been done with the tacit or open approval of almost all countries in the region and beyond. The Europeans have been their usual contradictory, noisy self, but made no differences to what is unfolding in West Asia. Even Russia and China, which signed with much fanfare comprehensive strategic partnerships agreements with Iran in January 2025 and March 2021, respectively, were silent spectators. It is not that all these countries were helpless, they made a conscious decision not to interfere when Iran and its proxies are being dismantled in the region. So here we can see the proper context, that is talking about the West Asia, Middle East, have a prolonged instability. Why they have seen this prolonged instability is due to Iran's military and ideological influence, then Israeli American hostility towards Iran, then proxy conflicts that's occurring in the region, in the countries Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Yemen. As we read further in the editorial, we can see here I'm reading that the reality is now the Iranian nuclear threat being rendered ineffective. West Asia is faced with sole dominant nuclear power, Israel. The region here has 40,000 American troops stationed on its soil in addition to numerous air and sea assets. Here, the Iranian strategic and military depth in the region, which seen through the prism of its political ideology, made it a predominant threat in the region. The presence of aggressive Iran made the Gulf countries soft pedal and even make compromises on many other issues which region has been plagued with, including the Palestine. Okay. Here is giving a shift in the emerging. Shift is emerging. The proxy wars are being dismantled, and the region is moving towards this exclamation. Just a minute. I have some glitch with my pen. Declaration. Here, the editorial examines the strategic threat, the retreat of Iran's US-Israel recalibration, and implication of global and Indian foreign policies. Okay. Further, moving on, reading on this highlighted part, the Gulf countries have been busy building bridges with US administration and waiting to operationalize Abraham Accords, which normalized their relations with Israel. We have made US President Donald Trump happy by doling out goodies. Iran has hit back. Its missiles have targeted US military bases in Qatar, the biggest US base in West Asia with 10,000 personnel and in Iraq. While the US announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran is surprising voice for reason for the rest of the world, what matter is only declaration. That's just I talked about that there is a shift is emerging. The proxy wars are now being dismantled and moving towards declaration. Okay. For Iran's leadership is it is existential crisis. For the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, we don't need to read all these leaders' names as it's not required in the case of UPSC. It's you only have to know what is the editorial is about and what's talking about. So just avoiding or just excluding this part, we continue reading. For Iran's leadership, it is an existential crisis. Okay. The end game is regime change to dismantle their geological foundation and political ideology, an ideology which threatens everyone in the region. The war with Iran is still a work in progress with Israel and the US. They will not stop until they do a Syria on Iran, but there is no alternative regime waiting to take their place. Gulf states need to set up now to prevent an Iraq or Libya like collapse. Destabilize everyone in the region. Destabilized regime in the region has only given a fillip to Islamic fundamentalism and to terrorist organizations such as the Islamic State and Al Qaeda. So here, the key themes I'm talking about, if the editorial is talking about the key themes here is earlier what happened. Earlier, Iran was the dominant disruptor. Who was the dominant disruptor? It was the Iran in the region. How it's dominant? Via proxy war or the proxy groups with the proxy groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis. Okay, they had a significant ideological and military depth. in that region. Then, what the Iran region threat earlier was also to oppose the US presence and Israel. Now, what they're doing? Now, the Iran have the Iranian strategic depth. It's somewhat eroding. Somewhat, it's not the same as it was. Depth is eroding. Before they were dominant disruptor in the region of the proxy groups, in the region via proxy groups. Iran was earlier dominant disruptor. Now they are their Iranian strategic depth is eroding. It means Iranian proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza are being dismantled. Okay, what's happening is Iranian proxies. If you want, you can write it down in your notes. It will be helpful for you people. So Syria, then Gaza are being what's happening now is now being dismantled. Okay. Now Iran has not retaliated strongly to recent Israeli strikes. What is happening in the recent? What has it happened in the recent war that Iran not retaliated strongly to recent Israeli strikes. Its response to the US has been measured and defensive, indicating what does it indicate? Its response to the US is has been defensive. It's kind of measured. It's not like it's not kind of the retaliated type of thing that okay, this is the main kind of war occurring in the region, or they wanted the war. This was not the response. Its response was measured and defensive. And it clearly shows that it's now exhaustive or exhaustion and pressure. Here we have learned about the key things, that is earlier the Iran was this, now Iran is this. It means the earlier it was dominant disruptor in the region, and now it's kind of the response is kind of measured and defensive. Okay, and the Iran's depth and depth of strategic depth are now eroding. Their proxies in countries like Lebanon, Syria, Gaza are being dismantled. Okay, next key theme over here is changing Gulf. Just write. Let me write down changing Gulf equation. How the Gulf equation is changing. Here, first of all, the nation of the Gulf like UAE, Britain, just a sec, I have some glitch with my pen. It's not working properly. UAE, okay. Gulf countries like UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia were earlier threatened by Iran. Okay, were threatened by Iran, but these are normalized. These ties are normalized via with Israel, obviously with Israel via Abraham Accords. Okay, changing the equations. Were earlier threatened by Iran. These countries were threatened by Iran. Okay, but what happened with via Abraham Accord? These normalize the ties with Israel. Now what happened? They have started distancing from Iran due to their own pragmatic calculations. Okay, then reluctance to support a direct military confrontation with Iran. Now, the third key terms or key themes over here. We are reading about the key themes, right? So the third key themes is US and Israel strategic shift. Here is US and Israel posture is less about regime change now, more about coercive containment, avoiding a wider war escalation by design. Here, the Trump's policy of maximum pressure and sanction weakened the Iran but also contributed to regional fatigue. Recent ceasefire talks about and I listened. These ceasefires talks about Israel and Iran shows intent to reduce the conflict. Okay. Now the US and Israel strategic there has been a strategic shift. How the strategic shift? The words of contentment, they're avoiding a wider war, they have de-splitting by design, then the policy of the Trump, that is maximum pressure and sanction, weakened Iran, okay, but also contribute to the regional fatigue. Now, ceasefire talks, the recent that happened between the Israel and Iran, also shows intent to reduce conflict. So we can over here we can see like we can wrote down few points like coercive containment, de-escalation by design, then policy of Trump, maximum pressure and sanction, ways weaken the Iran. Then recent ceasefire talk between Israel and Iran shows intent to reduce conflict. Okay. Number 4 key thing, the bigger picture, a new Middle East. What is the new thing? The next key theme in this editorial is the bigger picture, a new Middle East. How new Middle East? Middle East appears recalibrating away from the constant confrontation. Arab nations are balancing ideological interest with economic needs. De-escalation is not out of goodwill but mutual exhaustion and pragmatism. Here, the Palestine remains unresolved but is no longer a unifying Arab issue. Focus is shifting towards economic development, trade, tech, and diplomacy. There's a new Middle East that is coming in the picture. Why? Because Arab nations are now balancing the ideological interests with their economic needs, because they now prioritizing the economic needs more than their ideological interests. That's why the Palestine issues remain unresolved, and it's not like no longer a unifying Arab issue. Then focus is now being shifted towards economic development, trade, tech, and diplomacy. Now, the implication for India. What would be the implications for India? Here, if this is happening, so what would be the implications for India? Obviously, it's kind of an opportunity. What kind of opportunity it is? India's balancing act between Iran, Israel, and Gulf states is now easier. Okay, now India can expand economic diplomacy, energy security, and defense ties. West Asia is India's extended neighborhood. This piece suits India's interest. So it's kind of opportunity in this sense. But if we talk about the cautions, okay, have some cautions as well. What are the opportunities here? It's balancing act. It's now becoming easier with the countries like Iran, Israel, and Gulf states. Okay. It now India can expand economic diplomacy, energy security, and other defense ties. Now West Asia and India's extended neighborhood. This piece suits India's interest. Okay. They have some caution as well. What are the cautions? Here, India must maintain a strategic neutrality. Here, India have to maintain the neutrality, and specifically in the case of strategic neutrality should be there, and not to be drawn into the bloc politics. Need to remain sensitive to the Palestine issue, especially for the domestic and diplomatic manners. Okay, here we have read the key themes again. One question can be formed for the GS paper 2 IR section that here the theme is India's neighborhood effect of policies of developed countries on India's interest. Okay, we can I will give you one question, but before that, I want to make you aware that this tutorial can be used in answer of IR in India's West Asia policy, Iran nuclear deal, fallout, India's role in regional stability. We can use an answer in GS paper 3 internal security, that is cross border terrorism, proxy wars, security dynamics in West Asia. Okay, here we can give the proxy groups like Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas are being dismantled, decline of the non-state actors, then positive implications for reducing external terror influence in India's Indian Ocean. We can give these type of things. And in JS paper 4, we can use this editorial in the ethics sections, international ethics in international diplomacy. How the ethics can be in the international diplomacy, that is real politics versus idealism. What the idealism is there and what the real politics is going on. Like Iran's ideological policy framework shows ethical flaws of aggressive and expansionism. The West Asia's shifts reflect what the West Asia's shifts reflect. It's pragmatism, ideological and survival, the supremacy. These kind of things we can mention in the ethics section. We can even use this topic as a tagline, as an AC tagline. Use in AC, right? In global diplomacy of the age and geological wars is ending, escalation is a new power. Okay, so in the AC is like this, or we can use a tagline, for example, uh, the politics of peace is harder than the politics of war. Then we can give the reference of Iran and Israel stops. Okay, these are the things. If we talk about the question, I was before I told you that I will give. So one question can be framed for GS2 that West Asia is undergoing a strategic reset driven more by pragmatism than peace. Discuss its implications for India's regional democracy. Strategic reset driven more by pragmatism than peace. Discuss its implications for India's regional diplomacy. Okay, here the model answer is model answer could be framed. I will tell you the model answer of this, but you first try to write it down your own. Just pause this video and try to write it down in your own words. Here I'm giving you a few hints that how you should start. Like here is given question is West Asia is underlying a strategic is research, driven more by pragmatism than peace. So what would be the implications for India's regional diplomacy? So here the Middle East, we can give the intro that Middle East once marred by intense rivalries, ideological confrontations, and proxy wars is witnessing a subtle but significant shift. Iran, the epicenter of the strategic disruption, has seen its proxies weakened or dismantled in Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria. Gulf nations that once feared Tehran now normalizes relations with Israel, prioritizing economic stability over ideological allegiance. In we can give example like United States after years of military pressures now prompted escalations. Israel too is rethinking long-term conflict. That this is a reset. This reset reflects goodwill, not goodwill, but exhaustion, sanction, impact, and regional fatigue. Implication. What are the implication? Now come to the implication. Implication we can give that for India, this transitions offers a strategic opening. Like with the reduced tension, India can now pursue deeper energy, trade, and security partnership without navigating ideological minefields. It also reduces the threat of proxy-linked terror spillover into the Indian Ocean. However, India must tread cautiously, especially on the unresolved Palestine issue, which is still hold a symbolic fate in the Islamic world and among Indian communities. Then we can talk about the strategic neutrality and balanced engagement will be a key. So we can give the last, the conclusion side that West Asia's declaration through fragile is a timely opportunity for India to consolidate its regional influence without compromising its core value. Okay. And the last to be a part of the answer to the conclusion, we can give that uh, West Asia, long heartbeat of ideological and military consultations, is recalibrating not from the virtue but from fatigue and realism. For I think it is the main editorial context, and these are the things that will come in the answer. So basically, it is the model answer. You can write it on your own and try to give the answer in a very flow manner. It should be in a flow. It should not be like uh, disrupted manner. If the answer should be in a flow, in the manner that the examiner who is going to see or check your answer will able to know that okay, you started from here and you're going through this and you're ending in this way. So conclusion should be a very kind of, you can give a better, it should be there in your answer, and you can give one or two line of sentences by putting over there. So basically it was the theme that I've covered over here. You can check it. If you find any doubt, just comment in the box and just like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe the channel. Thank you. Hello everyone, I hope you people are good. So here I find one more editorial I just want to discuss with you people that came on 28th of June, The Hindu. Here is given an editorial that recognizing Adivasi identity in the consensus. Okay, here this topic is related with the GS paper 1, that's society section, society and diversity. Okay, here we can use this editorial in the section like salient features of Indian society, then diversity of India, tribal issues. Okay, so here we can use this editorial also in the non-recognition of Adivasis religions threatens India's pluralism. Then we can also link it with the culture, languages, religion, and identity preservation. Okay, so I'm just writing it down for you people that we can use in the section that how non-recognition of Adivasis religion. What's a sect? Adivasi religions threatens threatens India's pluralism. We can link it to the culture or language or religion or and identity preservation. Okay, we can also use in the paper GS2 the governance and constitution. Here the topic Indian constitution, fundamental rights, rights of minorities, uh, one sec, minorities, SC/ST welfare. So we can use this article in the answer, in framing the answers related to the governance and constitution, the rights of minorities, SC/STs, welfare. Okay, like in big sense, like Article 25, 26, that is right to religion. Then fifth and sixth schedule is for the tribal rights and census policies, how it's impacting the benefit, like the schemes or reservations are given. So we can use this in the GS paper too. We can also find this editorial useful for the paper GS4 ethics, where we cover the social justice, equality, empathy, and also the public responsibility. Like state must ensure inclusive enumeration, So we will see this section after reading this article. So this article is basically the census, which includes. Here I'm just reading it out for you people so that you will understand a brief over point of view. Here it's given that census includes the religious demography of India's through the registration of a person's religious belief. The religions mentioned are Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Jainism, and Buddhism. For those with other beliefs, there is a general column titled Other Religious Persuasions. There is a no column for the belief of STs. This omission is unconstitutional. Here, the the senior member of CPIM, the Brinda Karat, in her editorials, clarifying that they not mention the omission of the belief of STs is unconstitutional. How unconstitutional move? Let's read the further. Here she is written, the Constitution has a specific provision for the protection of the beliefs, customs, and traditions of STs, such as those reflected in the 5th and 6th schedules. In addition, Article 371A and 371B have specific protections for customary laws and practices in Nagaland and Assam, respectively. Article 25 ensures the right to profess, practice, and propagate one's faith. Okay, here. Then Article 26. What the Article 26 says? It guarantees the right to manage religious affairs for STs. These rights must translate into recognitions of distinct faith-based belief and practices centered on nature, worship, and ancestral traditions. Next, she written that the restriction in the census to 6 religions or the ambiguous ORP categories violates the spirit of Article 25 as it compels STs to misidentifying with mainstream faith or be relegated to a catch-all category, which is the ORP. Again, she mentioned that large majority of ST communities could not register the religious or spiritual identity and had to misidentifying with other religions. This is unjust and unfair. The majority of Adivasis live in the rural habitats and have a little information about the meaning of the ORP, that is the other religious persuasion. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the knowledge, or they don't know the meaning, what the exact meaning of ORP. ST communities prefer to register their own faith. The issue gained importance because of the reality of a changed political context affecting Adivasis' rights. So RSS group have strengthened the narrative that the Vanavasis forest dwellers are historically part of the greater Hindu family. They are new forms of Hindustanization of ST communities. The strategy is to realign ST rituals with Hindu practices, introduce slogans celebrating Hindu God among traditional chants, build Hindu temples, ST areas. This is well thought out plan to build an overarching Hindu Tattva identity among STs as part of the core agenda of the RSS. It demands that Adivasis who convert to Christianity should be stripped of their recognition as STs. Yet, STs who practice Hindu rituals or identify themselves as Hindus are still eligible for the recognition as ST. The constitutional and legal view is that recognition of the community as ST is linked to several other factors, not religious affiliations. So here, in the last, she mentioned that India is diversity, and in fact, it's well represented by ST groups who embody a rich mosaic of cultural, linguistic, spiritual diversity. Adivasi has been pushing back against new forms and methods of assimilation. The demand for recognition of the faith is a consensus. Its census is one such form of resistance. Okay. Now, here she mentioned a separate column in the census should be added titled Adivasis ST faiths. Here, what she mentioned that a separate column should be there in the census, and it should mention the title Adivasi or ST faiths. Will be then be a par and other 6 major religions. All political parties should put pressure on the government for such inclusion to strengthen democracy and constitutional rights of Adivasi. So here she clearly mentioned that she had an issue with the non-inclusion of Adivasis in the religion religious belief, in the religious demography of the census. So here in this context, just in the editorial context, here the issue is India is planning its next census in 2027. Okay, the census is very important because it collects data about population, religion, caste, languages, and aid the government to frame policies, allocate funds, and provide affirmative actions like resolutions. So, but there is a problem. The government has not included a separate column to record Adivasi tribal religions identities. Instead, these communities are pushed into vague category called other religious persuasion, that is ORP, that which hides their true identity, which is not clarifying that what identity they belong to. Okay, that's the problem. Now here you have to understand that who are Adivasis. Okay, and why it's so important. In this editorial is given about Adivasi. So, who are Adivasis? The first question is arising in your mind is who are Adivasis and is this important? Why is this important? So, Adivasis are none but scheduled tribes or tribal communities living in India. They're called indigenous tribal communities. Okay, STs or indigenous tribal communities. Okay. They practice nature-based, animistic, ancestral religions. What they practice? What type of religion they practice? They practice nature-based religion or animistic or ancestral religion. They followed and they practiced. They not practice Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Buddhism, etc. They are Adivasis are culturally distinct. How they are distinct? They culturally distinct in the manner of the ritual they practice, the festival they celebrate, the customs they follow. They're totally different from the mainstream society. They got protected under 5th and 6th schedule of the constitution. For instance, let's take an example that Sanna religion, we all know, that's followed in Jharkhand. It's not Hindu, but nature worship. Yet they have no space in the census to register this separately. Okay, here is the issue that why the separate column for the Adivasi, separate column with the title of Adivasi is not there in the census under religions denominations. So here, the main agenda was this non-inclusion of the ST categories in the census. Here, the next is the constitutional provision. How the constitutional is providing them the benefit, okay, the opportunity. Here, Article 25 strictly says that, here mentioned in the article as well, in the editorial as well, that Article 25 and 26, okay, given the freedom of religion, right to profess, practice, and propagate one faith. It's the article of Article 25. Then we have Article 26, which gives the rights of religious denominations to manage their affairs. Okay. Then 5th schedule is there in the Constitution, which also safeguards STs in the safeguards for STs in mainland India. Then the 6th schedule, we have the special provisions for tribal areas in Northeast India. Okay. Then Article 371A and 371B also recognizes tribals customary laws in Nagaland and Assam. Okay, what is the implication? What is the implication of this? This implication will be the constitution protects tribal customs and religious practices. If these are not recognized officially, it is a constitutional violation. This says as per the article. So what is the problem with the ORP column, that is other religious practices? What is actually the problem? The census is list only 6 major religions, that is Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Jainism and Buddhism. If you don't belong to any one of them of your religion, it goes into ORP, that is other religious persuasion. Okay, let me edit the ORP. ORP is full form as other religious persuasion. Okay, so if you don't belong any of the category which is mentioned above, that I told above, that Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Jainism, and Buddhism, then you automatically belong to the ORP category. In 2011, what happened is, as per the data, that only 0.66% of people registered under ORP, that is, other religious persuasion. Most Adivasis were either counted as Hindu by default or put into ORP without understanding what it means. Because many Adivasis, as per the editorial, she says that, as per the her editorial point of view, taking, she told that the Adivasi don't have the knowledge to which the category they belong. What does the ORP's term, what is the key concept, what does it mean? Without knowledge, they just putting themselves into the ORP category, and this is not justice. This is not doing justice to them, because this hide their true cultural identity, and obviously it's played a false religious data. Okay, this were the implications. This is the problem of the ORP. Okay, now we will look at the political and social implication. What are the political and social implication? Obviously, it's a viewpoint from the society. We take this editorial from the viewpoint of the society. There are some political and social implications. That is loss of identity. Okay, then forced assimilation will be there. Then policy distortion will be there. Okay, so these things like loss of identity, like tribals like Sarnas, Bones, Hills have a unique faith system. If we're not recognized, they're counted as a Hindus, Christian, Muslim, which erases their independent identity. Okay, one have to maintain their identity, and for that identity they need some kind of recognition, and that's mentioned over here. Then forced assimilation. Here in the editorial it says that push to Hinduize tribals. Here we did now, there's a push to Hinduize tribals. That use of RSS school, celebrating Ramnavi, Hindu rituals, declaring tribals part of one Vasi or greater Hindu family. So these, what is they are doing? They are just, they're just pushing. They are like, they are assimilating the tribals into religion by using RSS school or celebrating Ramnami or Hindu rituals. They don't want to just, you know assimilate this. So it clearly shows there's a kind of a forced assimilation is happening. So here the threaten, like, obviously this forced assimilation is going to threaten India's cultural pluralism and violates the right to religious freedom. Then the third, we can write over here the forced assimilation. As per the article we have read, there is a push to Hinduize. Obviously, is a threat to India's cultural pluralism. Pluralism. Then policy distortion. For the correct religious data, government can't plan development programs effectively. Okay. If the government have the correct religious data, then only the government can plan about the development programs effectively. Without correct information, or without the correct data, government won't be able to plan. Then the tribals may not get the funding or support for the cultural or linguistic or religious preservation, because the government don't have they have the correct information with that how many percentage of the population representing the tribals population. They don't have the correct information. Without correct information, the development program will not be effectively, properly or implement, and due to this it may be have as a consequences that tribals may not get the funding, they may not get the proper the support for their cultural program or linguistic or the religious preservations and so on. So here in the editorial, one more thing is showing, that is the demand for separate religion code. As the end of the ending, as the last para is given a separate column in the census should be added. Okay, what does it indicate? It indicates that it's demanding for a separate religion code. Okay, instances in the past has happened. Like in 2020, what happened in Jharkhand Assembly? They passed a resolution demanding a separate Sarna region code in the census. Okay. Now there's a demand for a new census called out title Adivasi tribal faiths. What happened in the previously what happened in 2020, Jharkhand Assembly passed resolution demanded demanding a separate Sarna religion code. Okay, but the center ignored it. This is ignored by the this is ignored by the government, and the religion they demanded was a Sarna religion code in the census. Okay. Now, what they're demanding? They're demanding for the Adivasi tribal faith. Okay. This is not about the one tribe. It is about representation of 10 plus crore people. That is 8.6% of population upholding the democracy and constitutional rights. So here the demand for a new Adivasi or a tribal faith is to officially recognize them. Okay, it's a kind of, it's not so easy because it's not talking about the one tribe. As I say, it's talking about the 8.6% of the population. Okay, so here we come to an end to this article. I will give you one question of this. The non-recognition of Adivasi. We can frame one question like this: the non-recognition of Adivasi religion in the caste or in the census, not caste census, but census reflects a serious gap in India's commitment to diversity and constitutional justice. Examine. We can give this question for the JS paper too. Okay. First question is, let me reread it. The non-recognition of Adivasi religion in the census reflects a serious gap in India's commitment to diversity and constitutional justice. Okay, so how can we approach this answer? We can give the intro that India's population, ST population is more than 8%, only 8%. Despite constitutional protection, tribal faiths have no separate category in the census. We can go with the introduction, with the passage, with the sentences was given in the question. Okay, non-recognition of Adivasi. So okay, this is the population of the tribal. Still, they have not get the no separate category in the census. Okay, the body we can give that these just a sec. The body we can give that this is the article 25, 26 religious freedom. Then we can give the other fifth and sixth schedule and protect the tribal tradition. These are the constitutional articles. Okay, because here is talking about the constitutional justice, so we have to give the articles in the body. Okay, we have to give the relevant articles in the body of the answer. So article 25, 26 is there for the religious freedom. Then fifth and sixth schedule to protect the tribal traditions. Then we have the ORP category is also, that is other religious persuasion category, is also vague. Means it's not it's not showing the real picture or real identity of the Adivasi, and that's impacting the identity loss policy gap, religious misclassification. Then it's also rising homogenization, dilates the pluralism. Like we have read that the Hinduization is forced assimilation is happening. So these can be given as an impact. Now, as a way forward, we can talk about the separate tribal faith category in the census, then culture awareness campaign in the tribal region. Okay, then there should be a in the case in the field of the policy making, there should be a tribal representation should be there. They should increase the tribal representation, or at least there should be a tribal representation in the policy making. So these could be the this possible way forward in this section. Okay. you don't think that whether it is ethical or not. You just go with the question. The question is asking is saying that non-recognition of Adivasi religion in the census reflects a serious gap in the Indians' commitment to diversity and constitution. How it's creating a gap and how it could be filled. Okay, what are the impacts are there? Okay, impact, we will write the body, this our constitution articles are there, then ORP issues is there, then if how it's impacting, this is an impact. And how, what could be the way forward? Will be cultural awareness for campaigns in the tribal region should be happening, then separate tribal pay category, then we can do the tribal representation and policy making. The last part, the conclusion part, we can give that India's uh, commitment to diversity must reflect in data and its governance. Recognition is not a favor, it's a right. Okay. So here the question is given now. In the census, we have India's commitment to. We can start from here. We can give this in the conclusion. This line, this word, that India's commitment to diversity must reflect in its data and governance, because recognition is not a favor; it's a right. Okay. Recognition is somewhat is a right. So here we have come to an end to this article. It's very beautiful article she has written and have formed the question. So this is all for this session. Thank you. Take care. Subscribe and like the video.